Well, it says we're live. Hello, everyone. It's 4 o'clock Pacific, 5 o'clock here in Costa Rica, 7 o'clock on the East Coast, midnight in Dublin, 1 a.m. in London and most of Europe, 8:30 and 9:30 a.m. Wednesday morning in Australia. And I still don't know what time it is in New Zealand, but it's Facebook Live. Oh, and he says, at least he's trying to tell me what the time is in New Zealand. Yes. And Gio and I are here with our very special guest, and it's really an honor to introduce you, for those of you who have never met, Dr. Jeffery Bland. Dr. Bland is the founder, co-founder with his wife of the Institute for Functional Medicine. And this is my mentor. This is the man who has given me so much guidance over the years in how to think about health and health topics. So everything that you get from me is because of him. And with that, I'll say, Dr. Jeff and Dr. Bland, it's really nice to have you here.
Well, Tom, to say that this is a treat would be a gross understatement. There's very few times in a person's life where you have friends and colleagues that have traveled the journey of your life over the various topographies, as you and I have had the privilege of doing over the many decades now. And to share this landscape with you has truly been an honor and a privilege, and to watch how you have advanced this field through your dedication and teaching and clinical acumen has been a model for me and obviously millions of other people. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was Dr. Bland that arranged for me to do my first series of talks on gluten. And that was back in 2008 when I formally would do 8-hour presentations. And I believe we did 26 that first year. And then the following year in 2009, it was 28 full-day presentations on autoimmunity and how gluten may contribute to autoimmunity. And we were the pioneers talking about this, and now so many more know and understand about this. And it always gives me a thrill when I hear a young doctor talking about these principles of gluten contributing to autoimmune diseases. And it sits so well. I can only imagine what it's like for you, and seeing how your message has come through over the years.
Yeah, I believe that for both of us, the big takeaway are the experiences that we have the fortune of sharing with people who come up to us and will tell us how something we said or some idea that we transmitted, communicated to them, changed their lives or their families' lives or their loved ones' lives or their friends' lives, or, in terms of what the value proposition of living is all about, I think it comes down to the interconnectedness of people, plants, and planet through ways of giving and sharing, because when you do that, you get more in return than you gave. It's always been my experience. And I think you and I have had more than our fair share of remarkable experiences. Let me share one, actually. I think you get a kick out of this. It happened just to me last week. I was telling you that I had this privilege of spending 15 days on 15 consecutive Father's Day experiences with my two older sons, who are just turning in July, turning 52 and 49. And they were very, their wives and families were very gracious and allowed them to join me for 15 days in Southeast Alaska on a boat that we just traveled together on, circumnavigating the three major islands there, Admiralty, Chichikov, and Baranof Islands. And it was, from a natural adventure experience, it was remarkable. But beyond that, probably deeper than that, was what happens when you're with your closest people probably in your lives, which is your immediate family, and in this case, my sons, just sharing the topography of your lives that you've gone together. And something remarkable happened at the end of this 15 days that you could not really probably predict. So as we pulled into Auk Bay in Juneau, we started in Sitka and we ended up in Juneau where we dropped off our boat and we're going to go to the Juneau airport to fly home. And across the finger slip from us was another boat that we had met the couple the evening before, a very nice couple that were living aboard their boat for the summer. And so as I got out of the boat in the morning to walk down the dock carrying our stuff to the parking lot, the guy opened, the captain of the other boat opened his door and he looked out at me, he says, "Are you Jeffrey Stewart Bland?" And I said, yes, I am. How did you find that out? And he said, "Well, after speaking with you last night, I was kind of impressed with the conversation we had. So I went back and my wife and I looked you up on the internet. And I just want to thank you." And I said, well, I appreciate that, but what are you thanking me for? We only just had like a half an hour conversation last night. And he said, "I want to thank you because when we looked at the internet, my wife started crying because we found out that you were one of the founders of the Institute for Functional Medicine, and it saved the mental health of one of our daughters who was going to have to be institutionalized. And we got her into a functional medicine program, and she is now returned into society and is healed." Now, you know that experience, don't you? What
Yes.
it gives you. It is so deeply, powerfully moving. And it reminds you, reminds me and you, why those 6 million miles of air travel that I did over the last 40 years were all worthwhile.
Yes.
In that moment, I could re-see it kind of like a hologram of all those mini seminars that you and I were involved in, all those hotel rooms, all that away from your family. It's a huge gift, and just kind of capstoned this 15 days together that we had as fathers and son.
Brings tears to my eyes because it brings up my own memories of moments like that. Going through security at the airport and getting my shoes, and on the other side, and someone walks up to me and says, you're Dr. Tom. And I say, yes, and they start crying.
Yeah.
That you saved my daughter's life for
Yes.
those moments. And so for everyone out there, this is the godfather of functional medicine. So if you have a friend or a child or a partner who you think should hear this, send them a text message right now and said, get on Facebook at theDr.com and listen to what we're about to talk about, because it's very, very important. So with that, I'm going to do a little shout out here, Dr. Bland, to our online people. If I can find, oh, no, I don't have the right one. I'll do shout outs as soon as I can find it here. In the meantime, let's just get started with the topic that we wanted to talk about. And that is, in this time of perceived immune crisis, where everyone is concerned about their immune system and how is it working and what do I do to help my immune system? And one person says vitamin D, the other one says, no, my doctor said it doesn't help. One person says diet, the other says, no, it doesn't help. What do I do? And how do I look at immune function and enhance my immune function? So if we can start from that perspective, because you've introduced a concept that is completely new in medicine currently. I know there was a Viennese person that you were studying many, many years ago. And I remember you told me the story of his granddaughter shared his personal notes with you, and they're part of your library now, that I've contributed to your thinking about this whole process. Can you tell us, let's begin with, how should we be thinking about our immune systems?
Yeah, thank you. I've had a kind of a shift in my own understanding since you and I back in the 2000s and even before then were in conversation about how we would assemble this advancing information about the immune system, which is very, very sophisticated basic science, into a theme that could be understood and properly communicated to those people that are not necessarily wanting to read every article and dig into the science deeply. And what I've come to recognize, and I know you communicate this in your work as well, is that the immune system is one of the three places in our body that constantly is sampling the outside world and communicating 24/7, 365 with our inside body as to how things are going outside. And outside includes, by the way, the gut microbiome, because that's kind of outside the interior cavity of the body. And our immune system is a sampling system that is taking in information, and it's then translating that information, and it's encoding that information and sending out into the rest of the body to know how to behave. And that, if you think of the various information that it can get information, psychosocial information, it can get biophysical information, it can get material information from food, it can get radiochemical information from the electromagnetic spectrum. All that information we've learned that the immune system has translators of, and it translates it into changes of the body to be waiting with either open arms or closed fists as to how it's going to respond to that information. The closed fist is when the body feels it's being impaired or impaled, and as a consequence, it has to do its command and control and go into its warlike defensive mechanism, and it has to fight back. And we often think of that as inflammation and the process of activation, the color of red, the god of war, Mars, and rubor, color, and dolor is what doctors call it, the inflammation, swelling, and pain. And that's when the information that's being received is producing a response that the body should be doing when it feels like it's under threat. And then the other response that the immune system can do is one of peace, love, and joy. And it can say to the body, everything's cool outside, it's wonderful, we're in harmony, and we're going to produce an environment that you're going to have a really great day. Now, it turns out that if you have a lot of the alarm and danger signals coming in, that will imprint the immune system. It has a memory, and it can remember those events, and it can hold on to them for a lifetime. And it can accumulate those bad experiences, so it becomes more at rest, more unrest, and more alarmed over time. And this is what happens when people grow older. They get what scientists call immunosenescence. Their immune system ages. But what that really means is that the immune system collected a bunch of bad experiences that it couldn't get rid of. And as a consequence, our immune system gets more imperiled the older we get. And that's why, for instance, with SARS-CoV-2 infection, I think we see older age people having more serious infection and going on into COVID-19 disease with greater dysfunction, because they have an immune system that carries bad memories that doesn't give them the opportunity to absorb and control the virus in a way that it would if it was a more vital, younger, free of bad experiences. Now, it turns out that our body does have a process to rid itself of bad memories in the immune system. And it's that story that's really been emerging in immunological science that I'm very interested in, because it's not a one-way street. Yes, you can collect bad memories or memories of danger, but you can also rid yourself of those, just as you can in your life through behavioral conditioning and having good thoughts and doing meditation, hanging out with good friends and all that kind of stuff, having a loving attitude. You can also do that same kind of cleansing process in your immune system. And the mechanism by which that has occurred has just really been discovered over the last, say, decade. It won a Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology in 2013, and it's called autophagy and mitophagy, selective ways that your immune system gets rid of bad memories and damaged immune cells so that it makes room for fresh new ones that aren't imprinted with bad experiences. So one of the things that I've been very interested in, and I know you as well have, is how do we accelerate the ability of our body to get rid of bad memories in our immune system, revitalize itself, and we do so. And Sid Baker said this years ago, as we know, we've quoted it so many times in functional medicine, that is, you take away the bad things and you give the good things, right? So the question is, what are the bad things? Gluten being one of those for many people. And what are the good things? Those are things that we're now started learning that can be things like polyphenols from flavonoids in plant foods. So we're starting to really get a much better understanding of how our immune system can be rejuvenated. And that's been the focus of of my attention for the last few years, because I think our immune system is our sampling system for the world. And what we want to do is we want to sample joy. We don't want to sample and be responding always thinking we're impaired.
Right. Well, thank you for that brilliant overview. And I'm going to summarize it here for people, that as we age, our immune system remembers the traumas that we've gone through, whether they're chemical traumas or electromagnetics. You know, you're on your phone for 5 hours a day, it's part of your business, and you put it next to your head, or you're wearing a Bluetooth bud in your ear talking through the microphone. Whether you're eating French fries once or twice a week for 20 years or 40 years, whatever the trauma is, biochemical, electromagnetic, that our immune system remembers a lot of that. And some of that, we call them antibodies, that you're making antibodies that are there to protect you. And as we age, our immune system gets worn down because it's been so vigilant for so long, it doesn't have the reserves it doesn't have access to the reserves to be freshly responding and be selective. This is okay, this one's not. And that there's an entire science now with a lot of evidence as to how do we start to revitalize our immune system. And the geek terms are autophagy and mitophagy. So, but how do we start to re-energize our immune system? Am I summarizing that okay?
Yeah, I think you're doing a very, very good job. It's really important, I think, for people to understand that some of this memory that our immune system retains is really beneficial. That would be like when we think of maybe we got sick when we were younger and our body's immune system remembered that exposure to that virus. And now the next time we're exposed, it knows how to produce a defensive substance so that we limit being sick. Those are good parts of the immune system. But what we started to recognize is that there are things that happen that traumatize the immune system that produce what I call post-traumatic stress system syndrome of the immune system. And they actually influence the immune system in such a way is that it's constantly on guard. And that leads to a term that we've heard more and more called inflammaging, that our immune system is constantly in an inflamed state that contributes to our aging, not just of our immune system, but our whole body, that inflammaging process. So it's finding the right balance points that leads to proper recognition and defense while not overreacting and becoming constantly in a state of alarm. And that, I think, is what we're learning how to do, both with mind, body, and spirit, to create that environment.
And one of the things that I talk about regularly is our mutual friend, Dr. Deanna Minnick, has talked for years about the rainbow diet. And Dr. Bland talked earlier about polyphenols, and those are components in fruits and vegetables that give them their color. And it's those colorful components that have such powerful effect. Can you talk for a moment first, please, about polyphenols in fruits and vegetables and what they do for our immune system?
Yeah, isn't it interesting, Tom, that as we look back over our years in this field, that we recognize that the nutritional textbooks that were the standards of identity that students studied from and took tests from, they marginalized or even minimized the concept of these metabolites in plants, these some thousands of different flavonoids. They didn't even occupy a chapter in most nutrition textbooks because people said, well, there's no known essential need for them. They're not like a vitamin B1 or 2, where if you don't get it, you might get beriberi, or vitamin B3, you get pellagra. So people said, if you don't get a deficiency disease in their absence, then they must just be kind of waste materials in plants. But now what we've learned, particularly since the year 2000, where the human genome was deciphered and people started seeing how nutrients can influence the way genes are actually operating in our body, the so-called field of nutrigenomics, that these substances that we were discounting, these flavonoids, are actually critically important as signaling substances to tell our genes how to perform and how to behave. And the genes in our immune system are rapidly taking information from our environment there, because our immune system is basically regenerating itself every 60 days. I don't think most people know that the cells in our immune system we have today will be different than the cells in the immune system we have 2 months from now. And so the question is, when these cells are regenerated in our body, are they the same as, worse than, or better than the cells they're replacing? And for many people, they're replaced to be worse because they've collected bad memories that didn't get properly cleansed. And these signals that come from these polyphenols, these thousands of different chemicals in plants that we eat when we eat a whole food diet, particularly vegetable-based, because these are phytochemicals, plant-derived chemicals, substances, that those are extraordinarily important for this whole process of signaling to the genes of our immune system how to recreate itself in a healthy state.
My analogy for this is that for the vast majority of them, genes don't turn on and off. Rather, they're on a dimmer switch. And that the hand on the control of the dimmer switch to turn up the genes of anti-inflammation or turn down the genes of inflammation, or the reverse of all that, are the fruits and vegetables, the polyphenols and the antioxidants in our fruits and vegetables. And that the more colors you have of the rainbow in your diet, the more you're turning up the genes for anti-inflammation, which would mean a healthier immune cell will be produced, and turning down the genes of inflammation. But it's a dimmer switch.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully said. That's exactly right. I think that a lot of people feel that genes are immutable. They can't be changed. They just got the luck of the draw. Some people were lucky to get good genes, and other people, unfortunately, are thought to get bad genes. I don't think there are such thing as good and bad genes. I think genes are agnostic. How genes are actually expressed into our body's function is what's really important. And I mean, even some of these genetic diseases that we associate with infancy, which we said, oh, that's such a shame, you can't do anything about them, like Down syndrome, for instance, or Tay-Sachs, or Wilson's, or Gaucher's, or Fabry's, or sickle cell anemia. What we're now finding that many of those conditions exist in a myriad of different states of function in the body. Like there are individuals with Down syndrome genes, trisomy 21, that lead extraordinary healthy lives. They're happy people. You might say they look a little bit different, but that physiognomy has no relationship to the fact that they're capable of really great experiences in life. And then there are other people with the same genes, the same type of trisomy 21 Down syndrome characteristics, who are impaired and are very, very seriously injured from infancy on. And so it has to do with how those genes get expressed in their environment and ultimately create their outcome that is how we look, act, and feel.
Now, we know that every cell in our body regenerates, every cell. And as you said earlier, the question is, are you regenerating a healthier cell, the same level of function cell, or a more dysfunctional cell? And that is determined by the environment around the genes, the dimmer switch. Who's got its hand on the dimmer switch of each particular gene? So in reality, you know, a reality check, how long should it take for someone who is willing to transform their environmental triggers into non-immune stimulating foods, such as if you're sensitive to wheat, get wheat out of there completely, or dairy or soy or whatever it should be. They're willing to do the work, and they're willing to go with these ideas of rainbow diet. Ballpark for me some estimate of how long before they should know that they're on the right track.
Yeah, thank you. There are a lot of studies actually that have been done over the years trying to interrogate that question, by the way. And of course, different cells turn over at different rates. We would say the central nervous system, which I was told in school when I was doing my medical school training, I was told that the central nervous system really didn't turn over. You know, if you had a bad night as a fraternity member on Friday, that those damaged brain cells would never come back. you know. Yeah, but now we recognize that yes, the brain cells turn over more slowly, but they can regenerate, and there can be re-energization of brain cells over time. Similarly with bone remodels itself. It takes longer to do so. The calcium atoms in the bone today will not be the same calcium atoms in your bone 10 years from now. And then there are some cells that turn over almost on a daily basis, like your mucosal cells of your gut and your epithelia of your lungs and your skin. These cells turn over very rapidly. But on average, if I put all those different timelines together, it's been said that in 8 to 12 weeks, if you were really to make a dramatic change in the way you are treating your body, either good or bad, your body will change in response to that in 8 or 12 weeks. So we always try to set up a timeline of 3 months. We say that something like 3 to 4 months is where you will actually be on the curve of really being able to both measure with biomarkers, but also see clinically your improved health over that period of time.
Well, that leads us right into the topic where I'd like to go today. And before I get to that topic, I have a gift for everyone, that we're going to be talking now about a new food that's come on the market that Dr. Bland is really pioneering more awareness about. And I did an interview with him in January of this year for a summit that I was hosting. And the interview got great reviews. People were just so grateful. And there were hundreds and hundreds of emails about this interview. And we are putting the link here for everyone to that interview, so that
awesome.
you'll be able to hear the story as to how Dr. Bland was introduced to this concept of a very special food that historically has been here for a long, long time. I don't know, thousands of years perhaps, but
3,500 years.
3,500 years.
There's evidence of it being eaten, yeah.
Yeah, and we're not going to take the time to go through all that history, because I want to get to today and what you can do with it today. But the history is so remarkable. I mean, the story of Jeff on a train in China, sitting next to some guy and says, "You're Jeff," right? And the conversation that then led him to upstate New York, and a professor emeritus of agriculture, and the whole dynamic. It's a great, great story to understand how, in my opinion, the angels are guiding us to bring this food back on the planet now. So we're going to talk about Himalayan Tartary buckwheat. And it's, I had never heard of this food until about a year, maybe year and a half ago, when I heard Dr. Bland reference it. And Dr. Bland was kind enough to send us some samples of the buckwheat flour and some of the nutrition. And Marzi and I, it's a ritual for us every morning. Gio usually wakes up about 4 or 4:30, and he's up and ready to go, right? And we're like, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
And I make the coffee. And then we sit outside and watch the sunrise with Gio, listening to the monkeys and the birds. And but we have our morning coffee with our buckwheat cookies, our Himalayan Tartary buckwheat cookies. We
Fantastic.
have 1 cookie a day, every day.
Wow.
And it's remarkable. It's just remarkable. So let's do maybe a basic overview of what is Himalayan Tartary buckwheat.
Yeah, I think you've done a really great job of introducing it. It is a food that there is anthropological evidence that it's been consumed by humans in the Mongolian Himalayan region of Asia for 3,500 years. The reason that I believe it's stuck around for all those years is it has a very unique genetic structure that produces a seed. It's not a grain, it's a seed. It's actually a fruit seed. It's named, when we call buckwheat, we think of wheat, but it's not related to the wheat family at all in biology. And it turns out that it's a very tough plant. It doesn't require much moisture. It doesn't require fertilizer. It doesn't like pesticides, herbicides, or any biocides. It actually detoxifies bad soils. It has an aluminum detoxifying mechanism built into its genes, and it produces the highest level of plant immune substances that we know of any edible plant. And those are these families of these polyphenols, unique ones that give rise to its ability to defend itself against insects and other things in the hostile environment in which it's lived with, everything from frost to heat to no water to all sorts of bugs and so forth. So it has survived due to its genetic structure. Now, when you compare the genetic structure of Himalayan Tartary, the reason it's Tartary, this comes from the Tartar region of China. So in the Himalayan region of Tartar is where it was originated as a human food. And if you compare its genetic structure to that of common buckwheat, which is a very good food too, you find that it has a much greater percentage of its genes dedicated to the production of these plant defensive immune substances, these polyphenols. In fact, so much that compared to common buckwheat, which is already seen to be a very rich, flavonoid-rich plant food, it has 60 to 100 times more levels. It's not just 6 times, it's 60 to 100 times more. And as far as we know, it's the richest compilation of immune active plant nutrients in any single edible food that you would eat on a regular basis. In fact, it's very high in protein. The amino acid composition of it is complete, so it doesn't need other balanced protein sources for complete protein for humans. It has very high levels of soluble and insoluble fiber. It has an extraordinarily low glycemic index, so it's very favorable on glucose, postprandial glucose levels. It has high omega-3 fatty acids, ALA, alpha-linolenic acid, and it is very rich in vitamins and the highest in zinc and magnesium. So it's like a super of the superfoods. And it had sat there dormant in the American public until we happened on this one gentleman that you talked about that was the only person we could find in the United States that was growing on his little artisanal farm of 6 acres in Angelica, New York. This is a hobby farm. He was a post-academic agriculture professor at Cornell. So I asked him, why is this not more widely understood in America? And that has led me now into a 4 or 5 year deep study in the origin of this whole food. It turns out that food came through the trade in the Far East, ultimately into Eastern Europe, because Eastern Europe climatically was very well suited to the hostile conditions that this food likes to be grown in. And so it became a major foodstuff in Eastern European countries for many hundreds of years. It then found its way into Western Europe and ultimately was one of the first foods taken on colonial trips to the Northeast of the United States in the colonies. And it was a major form of nutrition for our colonial ancestors. Then over time, the acreage that it was grown became less and less, and people have speculated why that was. I think it's because it is very hard to mill. It doesn't produce as high a yield as does cultivars like wheat or barley or corn. And lastly, it has a flavor architecture that's, because of its high phytochemical content, that some people who like sweet or neutral flavors would find different than what they're used to. It has a flavor profile that I would call bitter. And what we're trying to get people to recognize is bitter is better. There is something about bitter. I'm kind of a student and have published a number of articles on the bitter taste receptors over the last 10 years. And the bitter taste receptors are not just found on the tips of the tongue, they're found on our gastrointestinal mucosa, and they release into the blood when stimulated hormones called intraendocrine hormones that regulate blood sugar, regulate obesity, and regulate inflammation. So there's something about bitter that we need to teach people about that is very, very valuable. So that's probably in part why Himalayan Tartary buckwheat has kind of fallen out for sweet, rich, white flour products. But I'm excited to say that we put together a food lab, people that I've worked with, Barb Schultz, Michelle Babb, people that have been with us for 25 years, who are all now working collaboratively in developing recipes and menu guides to make this product available in many different forms. And we're having, I love it, a competition on internet and social media of people with their recipes. We're naming recipes after people that have designed them now with Himalayan Tartary buckwheat. And we have the only source in the world of organic regenerative agriculture produced Himalayan Tartary buckwheat. So we're trying to bring this back as a family farm product in America.
You know, there are so many aspects of what you said that we could elaborate on. The first one that comes to mind is all of us have heard of taking the bitters. That if you've got some kind of digestive problem, you take some bitters and it helps. But not many people do that anymore, but we've heard of it and some people will do it. This food activates all of that in your body automatically, better digestion, better absorption, sending those hormone messengers out to keep your blood sugar stable. There are so many benefits. It just drops my jaw when I read about it that this type of buckwheat is 10 to 13% protein.
Yeah.
There's two concepts to that I want to elaborate on. First, that rice is 2.9 grams protein per 100 grams of rice. Brown rice is 2.6 grams. Corn is 3.4 grams. Quinoa is 4.4. Buckwheat's 5. And we're looking at Himalayan Tartary buckwheat that's up around 10 or 13. That it's such a higher amount of protein. And when you're eating protein, and the problem, I've said this so many times that some of the sickest patients I've ever seen are vegetarians. And it's because they're not getting enough protein. Well, I eat my beans and rice, but it's not quality protein. That there's something called the biological value of protein, meaning an egg is called the perfect food because if you eat 10 grams of protein from egg, your body will use 10 grams of protein. It's 100% biological value. Well, what we have here with Himalayan Tartary buckwheat, am I correct that the biological value is competitive up in the 90s to 100%?
Yeah, I think it's depending on what scale you use, it's somewhere between 85 and 90% biological value, or 0.8 to 0.9. And I think that's because when you look at its amino acid composition, it has much higher levels of lysine and methionine than normal grains have, which is the limiting amino acid for many vegetable proteins. So this has more an egg-like amino acid composition, particularly for a vegetable protein.
Yes, yeah. My jaw dropped when I saw the comparisons in what I thought are competitive foods like corn and rice and quinoa and buckwheat. It validated for me another reason why we're having our cookie every morning.
We're the same way. In fact, it was very funny when I did a little Instagram live on one Saturday morning, putting my recipe of chai-based Himalayan Tartary buckwheat pancakes together. It was fascinating to see the kind of responses people gave. Everything like, "What are you doing in the kitchen? You're a biochemist," to "Why are you eating flour? It's bad." And there were a lot of different opinions, but when you drill a little more deeply and understanding why this food is so unique in its composition, that it's not a grain, it's not a traditional flour, it's gluten-free, it has all these attributes of nutrition plus these polyphenols, people start saying, well, maybe this is not a bad idea. And when you put chai spice mix with it, oh my word, it really is, it's really fun.
Oh, that sounds really great. We've got a lot of questions, so let me just start with a few of them. Catherine asks, if it detoxes the soil, wouldn't those toxins be stored in the plant and thus passed on to whoever is eating it?
Oh, that's a really great question. The answer to that, and by the way, that's a lead into a really great story, so I'll try to say it quickly. The root nodules of plants are the communicator between the soil and the the growing part of the plant that's above ground, right? And so the root cells have a different structure and function than the cells in the leaves or the stalks or the ultimate fruit of the plant. The root cells of the Himalayan Tartary buckwheat plant is such that it captures through intercalation, a process of like chelation, toxic metals, and doesn't allow it to be transmitted up into the phloem or xylem or the circulatory system of the plant. So it captures it. We don't eat the roots of Himalayan Tartary buckwheat. And so it's like a buffer between the soil itself, where it's abstracting the nutrients you want, like magnesium, which it puts into the seed, but it's leaving behind the things like aluminum. Yeah. Now, why that's an important story, and we're involved in a science project right now. This is my geekism coming up, but I think you'll enjoy the story. We have now a new member of our team, Emily Weiss. She's a PhD soil scientist from Cornell, who her business card would say lover of soil. And she considers herself to be a steward of the soil. So if you think about plants when they grow in the soil, and you know this with healing the planet to healing the one person at a time, that the soil is the interface between the plant and its ultimate products of whatever it might produce. So we have started a research project looking at mycorrhizal inoculants that will fertilize the soil in a regenerative agriculture way. And we already have preliminary data showing that you can increase 30 to 50% the phytochemical levels in the final seed by having the right microbiological community in the soil. So we're actually developing a system to be able to produce super Himalayan Tartary buckwheat by regenerating the soil with the right organisms that cooperate with the root nodule cells to send the right signals up to the genes of the fruiting plant to produce the right kind of outcome, both in yield and composition. So this is a whole systems approach. This is like systems biology applied to growing Himalayan Tartary buckwheat.
That is so exciting. I mean, the whole concept that those who are here tonight who've watched us regularly know that it's the microbiome that has its hands on the steering wheel of how our body functions. And what you're saying is that the microbiome of the soil, as you're working with the microbiome of the soil, you're even going to enhance the power, the value of the polyphenols that are in Himalayan Tartary buckwheat.
And this comes back, Tom, to something you and I have talked about over the years, and that's what is the difference between an organic food that's grown under organic protocols versus commercial ag business produced food. And one of the major differences, other than the system that you're producing it, where you're lower intensive use of chemicals that reduces the burden of xenobiotics, which is in and itself valuable, but to the plant itself, what you're doing is you're creating in that plant, without using all those chemicals, the ability of the genes in the plant to do what they want to do naturally in their immune system. Those genes will go to sleep if they don't need to be used. So if you're putting a bunch of biocides and herbicides on the soil, it's getting rid of any of the signals that plant would get that it needs to activate those genes to produce those protective substances. So we feel that by our regenerative agriculture production of Himalayan Tartary buckwheat, we're getting the best of the best. We're awakening those genes to do their work that they're designed to do.
That's superb, just superb. And there have been a few people who've said, well, how do I get this? How do I try it? And of course, we're going to post the link here so you can go to Big Bold Health and you can see some of the studies, the information on Himalayan Tartary buckwheat, and you can order it, you can try it. The next
we're very excited. We're as I said, we've got this food lab with now all these people doing recipes and these chefs getting involved. And so we've got a really nice menu guide, recipe guide, when people get our flour to kind of test it. Because a lot of people just think, well, I'm going to make pancakes. Well, that's a good start. That's a simple. And then there's muffins, and then there's cookies, and then there's pretzels, and then there's crackers. And then it depends on how far you want to take the model, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing some of those recipes and trying them. Kim asks, does it contain B vitamins like wheat?
higher levels of B vitamins. We were amazed when we've done a lot of analysis and continue to do a lot of analysis. And the levels of the B complex vitamins is as high or higher than any of the grain-based flours in whole grain-based flours. So, and there's another interesting part of this story, which, you know, we're learning so much. It's interesting when you start deep drilling somewhere, you think you know something, and then there's always more to know the deeper you drill. So it turns out when you mill Himalayan Tartary buckwheat, and we had to find a artisanal miller to help us because it's a tough thing to mill at low temperature, and you don't want to really increase the temperature in your milling process so that you would injure some of these phytochemicals that you're trying to preserve. So we were able to form a relationship with a really wonderful miller in an artisanal mill in Trumansburg, New York. And when you dehull or dehusk the tiny little seed, which is tough because it's like an armored seed. That's probably one of the reasons it survived for so many years. It's pretty tough. You could run a tank over it and it wouldn't crush it. So when you take those hulls away, they have traditionally been considered waste. And so you really are more interested in the endosperm of the seed as the flour component. But we started doing some analysis and collaborating with a Tartary buckwheat group of scientists around the world, and found out that in these hulls, there is a very high level of unique pre and probiotics, and also a family of phytochemicals that are not found in the endosperm. And the two principal ones, for those who are science geeks, are called isoaurintin and isoquercetin. These two unique flavonoids found in the hulls principally turn out to have a very significant effect on healing the gut mucosa. There's all sorts of studies on them related to leaky gut and to gut inflammation. So we have now designed by milling these hulls down into a very fine particle size, we now have a wonderful potential prebiotic, probiotic kind of combination for gut health that we can use now the whole plant. We can use the whole seed. So it's been a part of our discovery process.
Well, that's marvelous. I look forward to learning more about the prebiotic value of this.
Well, you know, one of the things you and I have talked about over the years is a substance called D-chiroinositol, DCI. And it is a prebiotic non-digestible fiber material that has been shown clinically to have a very positive effect on polycystic ovarian syndrome and to insulin resistance. And there's actually been a drug application for the pharmaceutical use of a pharmaceutical grade D-chiroinositol for PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. Well, it turns out that Himalayan Tartary buckwheat hulls have one of the highest levels of D-chiroinositol of any vegetable product. So there are just so many things we learn as we get farther into this this learning process.
It's just marvelous. It's so very exciting to see what's happening. Julie asks, what if you're sensitive to buckwheat?
Well, as I said, there is some genetic homology between common buckwheat and Tartary buckwheat, but they're not the same. And you and I both know and have communicated that there is no such thing as any food that's tolerant to every human being. We know that there's sensitivity in some people to almost anything, but our experience to date has been that Himalayan Tartary buckwheat is very well tolerated for people who have had sensitivities for some of the other non-gluten flour materials, including common buckwheat. So again, I wouldn't guarantee, but I would say it's pretty neutral in terms of its response to people with immune uniqueness.
Marvelous, marvelous. Susan says it's sold as a supplement, or the flour is available as well on the Big Bold site. Thank you, Susan, and we're going to post the link for that here. Is the supplement as good nutritionally as, say, the flour?
Oh, that's another good question. So the supplement is really a concentrate of there are known to be 106 different phytochemicals in Himalayan Tartary buckwheat. Wow. There are about 65 in common buckwheat, and there's over 100 in Tartary buckwheat, and they're at much higher level. So the supplement is a concentrate of the phytochemicals. If you want the full value of the food, you want the flour, because that contains the carbohydrate and the protein and the lipids. And so it depends on, you know, some people say, well, I can't use a flower every day. Then we say, okay, then you've got the gap filling with the supplement of the phytochemicals. So it's a mix and match opportunity.
And are you looking at including some of the prebiotic in the flour? Is there someone experimenting with how to do that?
Oh yeah, yes. We're calling this this material microbiome magic because we have been studying its effect on the microbiome. So yes, we're going to have blended levels of that microbiome magic material within our flour. You know, some people like a very smooth textured flour, and when you put the fiber in there, it gives it a little bit more granularity. So we're trying to find how organoleptically this is received by different people, but we're going to be obviously having them both.
Oh, marvelous, marvelous. There have been 3 or 4 questions. Where can you get the seeds to grow on your own?
Ah, very good question. Well, presently, you know, you can't go to a seed store and buy this because it is a cultivar that hasn't been used in the United States for years. There will be a time, it's not today, but there will be a time where we're going to make seeds available. But right now, we're in kind of a, you know, we started off with just a limited number of acres. It took us a year to grow the seed so that we could plant more acres. So we didn't have any product for a year. We had to go through a whole growing season. This last harvest in the fall of 2020 was our first harvest of enough that we could commercialize it and make it available. But now we're actually running out of that first crop because of the demand. Now I have to have a year ahead forecast. So now we've contracted with our organic farmers for more acres. So coming up in 22 with a harvest in 22, I think we'll start to have enough that we can make it available in other forms. But right now it's been a deficiency crop for us because we're just, and one of the nice things I just would say as an aside, our farmers are remarkable people. They're 20 plus years organic farmers. They're dedicated to the family farm. They're so much fun to be with. They have their hands in the soil. And one of the things that we've learned is that we're paying a premium. We're guaranteeing a price for our farmers to produce this material for us. We didn't know if we were going to be able to sell it or not, but I thought you've got to get a start here. And so you got to guarantee a fair price for farmers to commit some of their land to this product. And fortunately, the amount that we guaranteed payment and their ability to produce a very good yield because they're good organic farmers. One of our farmers said to us that the revenue he gained out of that was able to pay off a loan and save his farm. So we're starting to provide a gainful crop, a cash crop for these organic farmers, I believe. We need to build the volume of use, but I think this is a system of how we change agriculture because it has to produce a revenue for farmers to keep their farms and to put this in crops. So it's all part of a big system that we're the big dream here. That's why we call it Big Bold Health.
It's really marvelous, and we all have heard of the dangers of the small farm and how they're having such a difficult time to survive. And it's just wonderful to hear the full circle of what's happening with this project of Himalayan Tartary Buckwheat. It's just marvelous. Jim asked the question, is it possible this food can be adaptogenic such that it might stimulate the appetite of someone with unwanted loss of appetite and weight while providing nutritional benefit to someone wanting to lose weight? I realize this is a stretch.
Well, I don't think that is a stretch, and I compliment Jim. You know, what is an adaptogen? That's an interesting question, isn't it? And an adaptogen is something that influences our body in one state to activate it, in another state to reduce its function. And so if you have something that can activate when the body needs to be activated and lower function when the body needs to lower function, that would be called an adaptogen. And these polyphenols that we were describing have that personality characteristic. It's not a one-way street. What it does is it regulates gene expression patterns such that if you need more, it's an upregulation. If you need less, the intelligence of the body shuts down and you get less production. So this is really the marvelous nature of the grand design as to how we were all put together. Drugs generally just do one way, right? They are just designed to generally inhibit. But we have in these natural processes the ability to regulate up and down regulation of function. So there are studies that have been done actually and published, and I didn't mention this, but the clinical studies in tartary buckwheat, of which there are many in the literature, have been done with something around, well, to use your cookie analogy, because there's actually a cookie study, Himalayan Tartary Buckwheat cookie study with type 2 diabetics, and they used 2 tartary buckwheat cookies a day, supplying about 50 grams of whole meal tartary buckwheat flour. So 50 grams is about a little over an ounce, right? It's an ounce and a half. So our pancake recipe, for instance, 2 pancakes of our pancake recipe would supply about the amount of tartary buckwheat phytochemicals that are associated with these clinical studies that show benefit in humans. So that we don't have to take huge amounts. This is a hormetic amount. It's a small amount that has a big effect on function, on biology.
Trish says, doesn't cooking deactivate some of the benefits?
Oh, that's another really good question. So many of these, now I'm going to sound like a geek, so I apologize, just bear with me for a sec. Many of these bioactive polyphenols that are present in this food, but in other foods, are bound up in what is called a glycoside form. And glycosides, when they're consumed in our diet, are broken down by digestion into the free, what's called aglycoin form of that polyphenol, which can be absorbed into the body and utilized. In cooking, you change the glycoside linkages in some of these some of these polyphenols. Some are made more bioavailable, and some are made a little less bioavailable. So the key is not using high temperature for long periods of time, moderate temperature, short period of time. You get the best of both worlds. You get activation of bioavailability without injuring the polyphenols.
Do you store the flour in a freezer?
You can store it in a freezer, yes, as long as it's away from moisture, so it's sealed and it's not condensing moisture. Yes, it can be stored for, and we've done stability testing now on our flour for, I guess it's 2 years now from our original batch. And if it's kept in a cool, dark environment, it has retained, it hasn't gone rancid, and it has retained its polyphenol content.
Nell asks, please comment on the health benefits of Himalayan Tartary tea.
Well, that has been a traditional way that has been used in Asian cultures, both in Japanese and Korean culture, and to some extent also in Chinese culture. The Tartary buckwheat tea is where the Tartary seeds are converted by a mechanical heating process into kind of where the seeds kind of explode into a larger surface area, so that when you fuse them with hot water, it can extract out the polyphenols. And so Tartary buckwheat tea is another way of delivering therapeutic value. And these are considered medicinal teas in Korean, Japanese, and Chinese. In fact, in the Yellow Emperor's Handbook, they talk all the way back then about therapeutic use of Tartary buckwheat as a medicinal food.
Maggie asked the question, and I don't think she's being cute. It's, is this the perfect food?
Well, I don't know if we could say there is such thing as a perfect food, but I think it fulfills a lot of the checks of the checkbox of a really remarkable nature-designed nutrition product that carries the legacy of plants' immune system into humans' immune system. The thing I like about it, you know, we're focused in Big World Health on developing what we call our community. It's a play on words, co-immunity, community. And the Tartary buckwheat plant is a kind of an intermediary in between the immune system of the planet and the immune system of the person and the immune system of the soil. So that is our community, that we are living as we're nurturing the plant, we're nurturing the human, and we're nurturing the planet, because the planet has its own immune system that can heal. And right now our immune system of the planet has been under stress, as our own human immune systems have been under stress.
That's just a marvelous place to pause now. The hour goes so fast. I want to remind everyone, we posted the link here so that you can watch the interview I did with Dr. Bland in January on how this all came about, the history. The story is so marvelous. And I just smiled through the whole thing, and I really did think the angels are guiding this one. And to Maggie's question, is this the perfect food? We have to remember our ancient ancestors were nomads. And so their bodies were designed to follow the herds, but to keep alternating what they were eating every day with what they could find. So I don't think there is a perfect food, as Dr. Bland said, but this particular food, given the way that most of us have lived our lives and our food selections over decades, and our immune senescence, and our desire to build immune rejuvenation and to have a stronger, more well-balanced functioning immune system to protect us and our children. I think this food is an incredible contribution to our armamentarium of how to have a healthy, strong immune system. So that's my summary of this one. And Dr. Bland, would you like to summarize Himalayan Tartary buckwheat for us?
Well, I think both you, Dr. O'Brien, and I are kind of students of history. We like to go back and look at how things came about and how we got to where we are. And the Himalayan Tartary buckwheat story for me historically is interesting because as a food in Mongol culture, there was a way of actually making a flatbread out of it. It was like a cone. It was almost like these ice cream cones, the waffle cones is what it looked like. And that very dry form of that waffle Tartary buckwheat cone was then taken out in the rucksacks that the people that would go out and forage for the tribes, the nomadic tribes, and they could live on this for weeks at a time because it was very stable, and they could break off pieces and eat it. So when I think of every time I use the Tartary buckwheat products, I'm always thinking of myself as foraging somewhere in the foothills of the Himalayan mountains, eating my cone that renourishes me. I kind of have this visual picture of going back 2,500 or 3,000 years.
Well, I've always wanted to have lembas bread, the bread of the elves in Lord of the Rings, and it sounds like we're finding our lembas bread here.
That's a good metaphor. Thank you. Yeah, great one.
All right, everyone. Well, Dr. Bland, thank you so much for not only for today, but for the lifetime of work that you've given us and the direction that you give us, and this project that you now are so heavily involved with. And you started off by saying you think you got one more round in you and that this is it. And this is a great signature to give to the planet. And thank you so very much for all of your work. And we look forward to learning more about this. And everyone, order it, try it, see what you think. I'd recommend you get enough of the flour to last you for 3 months. Remember we said 8 to 12 weeks for your immune system? So if we wanted to do 8 to 12 weeks of a daily serving of the flour, depending on the recipe, how many bags of flour should they order?
I would say 2 to 3 bags. So these are 2-pound bags. So that would be 800 to 1,200 grams, which would get you, if you were to, include this in your diet in different forms throughout the week, you would get through probably 3 bags over that period of time.
And you'll find recipes at bigboldhealth.com and different ways of trying it. I strongly recommend everyone try it. Marzi and I use it every day. We're really grateful we have it. And Dr. Bland, thank you so much for being with us.
Well, again, Dr. O'Brien, I can't tell you both for the fortune of first meeting you, but for the fortune of sharing our journey together over this path. And there's a lot of things ahead, but I think what we've laid down for other people to take, enrich, and apply is makes us both feel pretty good at the end of the day. So thank you.
Amen to that. All right, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.